Can Florida State's linebacker recruiting be fixed and fast?
You are Locked On Seminoles, your daily podcast on the Florida State Seminoles. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into Locked On Seminoles. I am your host, Brian Smith. Thank you for hitting that like button and that notification bell and making this your first listen each and every day. Truly appreciate it. Today's episode, we're going to talk about linebacker recruiting. We're going to go into recruiting overall. And then we're going to start finally, because we're getting close enough now, talking about the 2024 season with a little chatter regarding Georgia Tech and a couple of their playmakers. They got some explosive players there for the Yellow Jackets. Today's show is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. All right, the first thing here, if you follow Florida State recruiting, it has been a struggle over the years at certain spots at different times. Offensive line historically is the hardest for Florida State to recruit for whatever reason. Story for another day, but linebacker recruiting has never been one. But Randy Shannon's not known as a recruiter. Part of it's on the staff in general. Part of it's bad luck. But at the end of the day, you got to get enough players that are elite to win a title. And Florida State's on that cusp, but they've lost 3 straight linebacker recruits that have made decisions that they went in on. And there's others they would like to have 2, but they've lost 3 they had a pretty good shot with. Gavin Nix, lifelong Florida State fan, picks Miami. Zadrius Rainey-Sale, kid they had a pretty good shot at and probably led for a while, although he is from the Northwest. Full disclosure, that's a hard recruitment. He makes a decision. He sticks with the hometown Huskies. And then last night, everybody thought that Tavion Wallace would pick the Noles. If it was going to be anybody else, it'd be Georgia. He shocks everybody. And he goes with Arkansas. No offense to Arkansas. Florida State cannot lose recruiting battles to them. End of story. Full stop. No. That is just not acceptable. T. Will, the guy that recruited him, I'll go into depth on that in a second, is a tremendous recruiter. Not a good one, a tremendous recruiter. It is still Arkansas. They have a head coach that is about as close to done as it gets. And they get a commitment from a top 50 kid in southeastern Georgia, right in the heart of where Georgia and Florida State recruit, Auburn, Florida, etc. It is bizarre. Not sold that's going to be the end of it, but that's part of the situation. So it's out there. There's nothing new that I'm announcing here. But again, Randy Shannon's not known as a dominant recruiter. He's a really good coach. This is the problem that a lot of people discuss in my industry when I'm sitting here looking at my notes. Like, finding the balance between getting guys that are recruiters and good coaches is hard because usually it's one or the other. It's just true. But in my opinion, if I'm going to take one or the other, I'll take the recruiter now because it's just to the point 80% of college football is recruiting. And while Randy, he's coached up guys, and I thought the 2 kids they took last year were underrated. They're not getting enough numbers at linebacker, and they're not, they're losing kids in their backyard. They do have a shot at Tarbos Alford, TJ as we call him, to flip from Ohio State. We'll get into that in a bit. But they have to find a way to keep him on set because he can flat coach, but help him at recruiting because he's just not that guy. He's just not. At this point, it's just time to say it. He's just not a great recruiter. He's mid-level at best. I don't know if it's his age. He's 58 years old. He doesn't relate to you. I have no idea. I don't know the guy, but I do know from talking to people and looking at the results, watching the games, he can definitely coach. But imagine what he could do if he got like just one more kid a year, big-time kid, Tavion Wallace, or whatever player you want to pick, Alford, etc., to add what they have already. The defense would be even better, and that's the difference. You win with talent. There's just no shortcut here. It's nice to take a guy to the portal here or there. That's fine. They need to hit more home runs out of the high school ranks. I know this is going to look like me picking on Shannon, and I am to a certain degree. No doubts about it. But this is still a staff effort, too. I've been told multiple times by people that follow Florida State, people in the recruiting industry, et cetera, this is not the greatest recruiting staff. It's not, in my opinion, either, but other people know it better than me that have covered them longer have said that. they still got to come up with something because this doesn't cut it. You can't constantly lose guys in your backyard. Again, Randy Sales from the Washington area, they had a connection to him. That's different. I'm not going to really hold that against them, but you're losing kids in state. You're losing kids from Georgia. You're not breaking through in the state of Alabama. They're just not there. They're coming in second and third too often. What can be done? So that's the question. Here's the deal. Florida State had a really good defense last year. They had an undefeated regular season. They won the ACC title game. You really can't be in a better spot for the 25 class. You can't. So either they've got to flip Tarbos Alford, which TJ, or they've got to get one of these other kids to flip. They've already got Ethan Pritchard. He's been committed since last fall. He's a good player out of Seminole High School just outside of Orlando. Really like him. He's the undersized, fast linebacker, probably going to end up at will at some point is what I would guess. He's 200, 210 pounds, somewhere in there. He can really run. But you got to get 3 at least this year that are all really good. They don't have the numbers, and 3 is a minimum for me. I would take 4, but right now I'm just hoping they get to 3 because you can't just take flyers here. They only got 2 kids last year. They're both good, but Jaden Parrish, I think, is a dude. He's way underrated. I don't know why he's still a 3-star on a lot of the services, but then you got Tamir Hickman Collins, the kid from South Carolina, played at a small school. It's a little harder to rate him. I get it, but he's good too. Still, it's just 2. At minimum, you have to sign 3 pure linebackers this year. Upper echelon guys. It doesn't have to be 1990 Florida State recruiting. I get it, but it's got to be pretty darn close. And it also has to be a scenario where they're not only just getting guys, they get guys that fit, they can all play together. They can't get 3 middle linemen. They need a strong side guy. They need, or like an overhang. They need a middle. They need a will. They need a home run. They're trending in the wrong direction. And it's just shocking to me. Like when I grew up, Florida State's linebacker recruiting was insane. It was automatic. They would get 2 of the better linebackers in the country pretty much every year. Just about every position, really. But maybe it's just me being overzealous from following Florida State for so long, but it's just bizarre. So they need to fix it. Before I move on, a couple of things regarding Tavion Wallace. Number one, T. Will, as I mentioned a minute ago, I've brought up numerous times that relationships are what kids pick over the logo on the shirt. This is a great example of that. Elite recruiter. He was at UCF. He played at Auburn, played for the Falcons. He's a great guy to be around, high energy, always happy, blah, blah, blah. Just, he's a kid. It doesn't matter what school he's at. He's going to get kids. But he's still got a kid to go to Arkansas over Florida State. They got to find a way to replace that scenario. It's just not acceptable. And to be quite honest with you, Florida State has plenty of time to do it. It's July. And I still think Arkansas staff's going to get fired or Sam Pittman will step down. I don't know if T. Will be there, but that's something to think about. He is a linebacker by trade, so that would also be the guy that works with him. That's not an easy thing to overcome, but they still have to do it. Alford is a guy that's a very similar player, the kid from Vero Beach that's committed to Ohio State. Florida State is definitely involved with him. If they could somehow flip him and the other kid, it's just amazing. But they would go from, we have one guy that's pretty good, but we need numbers and talent, to all but hitting the home run at linebacker. That's why things in July, I don't go too much in. It's just right now it's not trending good. There's no other way around it. But they could, at the end, finish with an elite class. I still say they got to find a way to help Randy get some of these kids because he's just not getting it done, whether we want to say it or not. At the end of the day, they pick the position coach / coordinator more often than not than anything else. That's what recruits do. He's not getting it done. So that's something to talk about. We're going to talk a little bit about what's next for Florida State recruiting here in a second. And part of that will extend from this regarding how do you fix it, what needs to happen, some of my thoughts in regards to how Florida State can make the environment better in some way, shape, or form for these kids. That is next at Locked On Seminoles. All right. Are you tired of trying to get tickets to a Florida State game, a Marlins game, Tampa Bay Rays, or whatever it might be, and not getting what you want going through a ticket app? It's a pain. You don't know the price, whatever it might be. Gametime is an opportunity for you. You can pick out specific games or matchups that you'd love to attend. You can do it with a couple of clicks. It's not very hard. Just download the app. You can go in and look at the opportunities for flash deals, for zone deals. The closer you get to the start of a game, like game day, the lower the price will be. It's an opportunity to do that. You could also do things like get an opportunity with all-in price. This drives me nuts on other apps. You see a price, but when you go to the end, there's other taxes and fees. They have all-in pricing, and quite honestly, I wish everything on the internet was that way. It drives me nuts. And then finally, something I like, you can see the vantage point that you would be looking at the game from where you're sitting, whether it's baseball, basketball, football, wrestling, whatever it is, concert, music event, etc. You can look at your seat right on your phone and know where you're going to be. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use Locked On College for $20 off your first purchase. Again, create an account and redeem code Locked On College, LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. So what would you do to try to fix Florida State's linebacker recruiting? My idea is twofold. Number one, you got to stay the course and recruit the kids that you went all in on. Tarvis Alford, Tavion Wallace, etc. You certainly continue to recruit Gavin Nix, etc. Although that one I think will be harder. Miami won that one pretty convincingly. I would imagine there's some other guys in the cannon that they're trying to shoot. You know what I mean? There's always other kids you're working on behind the scenes. That's part of recruiting. But at the same time, it's just not something you can lay on. You got to get going here. You cannot have a one-member linebacker class or even two with one of them being a product. You need to hit a home run in this class to get back on track so you don't have to worry about using the portal. That is the objective at every single position for all teams, not just Florida State. We use the portal because we want to, not because we need to. That's where Georgia's at. That's where Alabama was before Saban left. Now they're in a different spot, but you've got to be at the point where you're just adding and picking and choosing. Florida State's on that cusp, but to get there, they got to win these battles. So here are some thoughts of mine. Number one, they've got the month of July. It's a dead period for the most part, but at the end of the summer, a lot of schools are having kids in. You got to make sure you get some of these guys to come to campus, and you also have to make sure that you have an opportunity to get them to come to your first, second game. They need to go a little extra with recruiting, especially, again, linebacker. I'm not talking about just one spot, though, but across the board. They've got to go to the next level with it. I've heard too many times from people in my industry, unsolicited, Florida State staff is not a great staff with recruiting. Repeat, unsolicited. That is not a good sign. You got to work harder. Period. They've got to find people to help in some way, shape, or form. The organization, I don't know what it is, something in the back office, whatever it is, they have to do more. Part of it is NIL. They are not going to spend what Miami does and some of these other schools on NIL. They just don't. That I know, and there's some other schools too, but Texas is NIL, Ohio State. Some of these are humongous numbers. If they get the players, I don't want to hear any complaining, though. You got to figure out a way. Certain schools don't even use NIL that much, are still having just as good, if not better, classes in Florida State. Penn State and Notre Dame in particular don't use NIL anywhere near as much as Florida State does. They get better classes, so I don't want to hear it. You have to find a way to move up. Now, the other part with this, you need to recruit your base better, like Tavion Wallace. Again, Southern Georgia. I talk about the Georgia kids all the time. That's a kid that fits Florida State culturally. It's not that far. He grows up that distance. It's just enough for a college experience, but he can still get home to see family. He's like 4 hours away or something. That's perfect. You have to find a way to win those battles in particular. That was Bobby Bowden's money. South Georgia, North Florida kids in December, January, before signing day in early February, he was money. Florida State has to get back to that. They have to close. Again, like I said in the first part of this show, they were coming in second and third. It's not like they're getting annihilated, but they're not getting across the finish line. Whatever it is, those little tweaks, they've got to find it on game day visits, etc. There's no shortcut here. I don't understand how you, with all the tradition that Florida State has, being a school that just came on the cusp of making the playoff, they had undefeated season, blah, blah, blah. I just don't understand how it's not already happened, but they got to figure that out pretty quick. If they don't, Florida State is not even going to end with the top 10 class because they're not going to meet needs. I don't care what the rankings say. Linebacker is a definitive need in this class as an example, but they just got 2 great defensive tackles. That was a spot. I mean, they can do it. That was a spot they had maybe even more of a need than linebacker. You could argue it. And they just got 2 really good ones. So I know they can do it. Now they got to finalize at every position. So that's something to think about. Before I go into talking about Georgia Tech, note that there's several more kids that could decide for Florida State or elsewhere this month. There's going to be a lot of randomness. I know Florida, Miami, et cetera. There's several schools that got commitments pretty much lined up, barring kids changing. A few kids in the state of Florida are leaving the state, et cetera. Just be wary that these things change quickly. Kids that are committed to you could not be, et cetera. Florida State also has to mind its own house, meaning the kids are already in the fold. And they've got a great class amongst the kids they do have committed. So slow and steady is probably good. Don't just jump into the mix with kids that aren't going to feel the need. You got to wait the course. If some of the kids I've talked about today, if you're going to flip them and it's not going to be till November, you got to eat it, man. You got to pay the price, and you got to recruit every single day like it's the last thing you're going to do. That's the recruiting world we live in, and it's 365 days a year. Yes, 365. Every single day is recruiting. So that's just the nature of the beast. Up next, we're going to talk a little bit about Georgia Tech. It's the opening game of the season for college football. Noles are going overseas, and I just wanted to talk a little bit about some of the specialists for Georgia Tech. They got some athletes that can make some big plays and some scenarios I'm curious about. We're going to have a really great matchup. Florida State secondary against some of the playmakers that Georgia Tech has. That is next on Locked On Seminoles. Would you believe we are less than 2 months away from kickoff? Florida State is in a scenario where they're going to be a top 15 team by pretty much every poll, top 10 by some, favored to win the ACC by many. But right off the bat, you've got a conference game, but it's overseas, which obviously is a little weird. And you're playing a common opponent, Georgia Tech. 2 schools know each other well. That game, ironically, is when the fast break offense got started. That's when Charlie Ward got rolling his redshirt junior year. They were down, and they started going to the fast break. They came back, and ever since then, Florida State was good, and then it went in the title the next year. So Georgia Tech has some meaning in the history of Florida State's football. But this year, they're going against a team that has very little defense. They were awful on defense last year until otherwise proven. I don't think Georgia Tech is going to be a great defense. They just don't get enough recruits out of high school on that side of the ball. And they do have offensive firepower, and they know their defense isn't that good. So they're going to take chances. Here's the good news. They turn the ball over some. They've got a solid offensive line, not great. They got 3 starters back, plus a guy that came in that started 5 games after somebody was banged up. A little bit of experience there. They got guys like Christian Leary, kid from Orlando, ironically, that have talent. They're coming off the bench sometimes, maybe start at receiver, have speed, but they also have some dudes too. The receivers for Georgia Tech give me some pause, but it starts still with Haynes King. He had 16 picks, I believe, off the top of my head last year, so he's a risk taker. He doesn't always control his emotions to move the ball down the field, and part of that, again, is their defense. They have to take chances because they can't stop anybody. They're awful on defense. But another year under his belt, and I want to bring up some of his stats here in a second, I just think he'll be more efficient. Even if he takes more sacks, percentage goes down a little bit because he throws it away. I don't think you'll have as many opportunities to score on them because you're going to have to go the length of the field. Not as easy. So to truly maximize their opportunity against Georgia Tech, Florida State, they got to take the picks if they're there, obviously, but they also have to understand that if he does start being smart with the football and checking down and taking those 5-yard hitch routes, throwing to the running back in the flat, it is what it is. You have to still play your keys and don't give up the big play because Georgia Tech, they hit plenty of them last year. King, by the way, is a runner just as much as a passer, if you don't remember. Stats from last year, 737 yards, 6.1 yards per tote, 10 touchdowns. That's really good. He's an athlete that can make a guy miss, and if he turns the corner, he's got jets. He's not your typical taller quarterback. He can really run. I also think that he's a kid that just loves the sport. He probably gets himself into more physical situations than he should. He should probably go down and slide a little more, just my opinion. But at Florida State can hit him hard a few times, obviously. As Al Davis once said, the quarterback must go down. He must go down hard. You got to take advantage of that too. I'm going to read off a few more stats here about Georgia Tech and some of the players they're going to go against. I'm going to go in depth with Florida State once we get to late July, more with them. I'm going to talk about some of the teams they play here the next few days. But these are good players for Georgia Tech. And I'm just curious how this is going to play out because, again, you can make an argument the best secondary in college football this next year, at least in the discussion, is Florida State. But they're going against some pretty good guys here. A couple of the players to note. Eric Singleton, 48 receptions, 714 yards, 14.9 yards per catch, 6 touchdowns last year. That's pretty good for a kid that was coming off his first year of being a dude in college football. That's actually really, really good. Not many freshmen do that. He's not the biggest guy, but he's twitchy, and he can get behind the defense. Malik Rutherford, this is another guy, not the biggest guy in the world, but can just really run. He's 5'9". He's a Miami kid. This game will mean something to him. He's going to be a redshirt junior. 46 receptions, 502 yards, 10.9 and 4. Not big, but that screen game, the quick passes, check down. If you don't come down and break down to tackle this kid, he's going to get by you and hit a home run. That's a really good football player. They don't necessarily have a guy that I go, wow, he is the big body, just dominant player. But at the same time, the way they play, and they can play some fast tempo if they want now, like they're familiar with each other, quarterbacks involved. I wouldn't be surprised if they threw some stuff at Florida State like that. I would. But they don't have to with how they play because Haynes can run. It makes them very, very awkward to defend. I'm curious if they can get anybody to even be the big body guy in the red zone. That might be the one thing they don't have, I would say. But at the same time, their running game is good enough to kind of make up for it for the most part. Christian Leary is the other guy that I think is going to be interesting. He had 309 yards last year, 25 catches, 12.4 yards and a couple of scores. They have some other guys coming up the ranks. I know that Chase Lane is a receiver that can be pretty good. He averaged 15 yards last year, but he only played in 7 games. He got banged up. Their balance at the receiver group, though, is the problem. Again, very quick, very athletic. Against Florida State secondary, which is sticky. They're good. This is a great matchup to start the season. You kind of know where you're at. Instead of playing some team, some directional school, and winning 48-3 where the starters are done in the early third quarter, I'd rather you play Georgia Tech. You should win, but you get a better barometer of where you're at. And if you lose this game this season, you weren't the team you thought you were anyway. That's kind of how I look at it. And it's cool, again, that Florida State's going overseas too. So at running back, a guy, this kind of shows once again, while we're thinking about it, you can never know for sure on projections. Jamal Haynes didn't play at all, really, as a freshman for Georgia Tech. Last year, 1,059 yards rushing, 6.1 yards, and 7 touchdowns. Holy cow, like he didn't have a carry the year before. They're going to have Anthony Carey's probably going to be their backup running back, the freshman out of Carrollwood Day School. I know him, ran into him recently over at his high school when he was back from Tech. He looks great. He's a 4'4" guy, but he's still a freshman. I think that's a kid that Florida State can take advantage of in pass rushing situations. Other than that, I mean, he's a good running back and he can catch. So their running back corps will be really good. If Florida State has any other advantage, I just don't think that Georgia Tech has a dominant tight end. They don't have a guy that you're like, And that kind of played into when I was researching it with their situation with jump balls, red zone, like you run a slant with a big body tight end. They don't care if you get 4 yards. It's still a touchdown if you're inside the 5. You know what I mean? Like they don't have that guy to my knowledge. And even a big body receiver that they can just purely count on for that. Speed, quickness, elusiveness, that's Georgia Tech's offense. So we'll be talking more about them as we get closer to the season. But again, I'll talk about their defense a little bit probably tomorrow. Georgia Tech's defense is, until otherwise proven, it's a sieve. DJ Uiagalelei and the offensive line and all the experience that the Noles have, they don't have a ton of experience with productivity at receiver, but all those guys know the offense, etc. They should have a field day. They really should against Georgia Tech. And that's a tailor-made game to get started. Good athletes, but they make mental errors and they give up big plays. Florida State, Toafili, and all those guys, they should hit some really, really big plays. 2 or 3 around 40, 50 yards would not surprise me. So that'll be coming up tomorrow on Locked On Seminoles. It is 4th of July, but I will be here. Absolutely. Going to post something. So check it out. Hope everybody has a great 4th. before I post that show tomorrow. Thank you very much. And once again, please hit that like button and that notification bell. Truly appreciate it. Everybody be good.